Welcome everyone. My name's Catherine Ainsworth. I'm the Chief Executive of Pony Club Australia, and thank you very much for coming tonight. We'll be recording this webinar and also posting it on YouTube afterwards. At the moment, everyone is on mute other than our speaker, and we'll be using the Q&A, which you'll see the bubble at the bottom of your screen, to ask questions, and we'll have questions at the end. The title of our webinar is Horse Welfare in the 5 Domains Model, and our speaker is Karen Luke. Karen's currently doing a PhD and in the areas of horse welfare and rider safety, and brings a lot of skills to the role that she now plays, with undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications in psychology, education and paramedicine. And I think if you wanted to be a pony club coach, that would be the sort of the perfect combination of skills. Karen's also a Pony Club NCAS Level 1 coach and has many years of coaching experience. That's in addition to her own riding career, where she continues to start and train her own horses. So as well as her PhD, Karen has a company called Equestrian Solutions International, and in that she is a consultant where she's focused on helping equestrian organisations and horse owners to develop the knowledge and skills to create a sustainable future for equestrian sport. And I think we all know, and Karen will be discussing, how important horse welfare is for that sustainable future for equestrian sport. So without further ado, we will hand over to you, Karen, to take us away. And Karen will be speaking for about 40 minutes and then we'll have questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you for the very kind introduction and the invitation to come and speak to you today. I'll share my screen and put up our presentation. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. And I guess before I get going, I did want to stress that although I'm a researcher and I'm working in the field of animal welfare and rider safety, like, I'm a Pony Club mum. My children went through Pony Club. My littlest daughter started when she was just 3 years old, because her big sister went to Pony Club, and I went to Pony Club as well when I was a kid, which and I loved my time at Pony Club. So I really am coming to you, you know, as one Pony Club person to another Pony Club person. And my intention tonight is to run through a few things and explain to you some of the latest sort of research and thinking about horse welfare and the 5 domains model, and also give you some tools that you can use in a practical way when you're out in the paddock or in the stable or on the arena with your horse. So we'll get started, and I want to start today or tonight with this beautiful photo. It's one of my favourite photos. It's a photo of Tommy Woodcock, who you might know was Farlap's strapper, and Tommy went on to become a racehorse trainer. And this is a photo of him and Reckless. It was taken in 1977. And one of the reasons I love it is I love the expression on both Tommy's face and Reckless's face. And I'm curious if you would like to put into the Q&A, how do you think Tommy feels about Reckless, and how do you think Reckless feels about Tommy? And the reason that I asked that question is because it is a bit of a mistake to think that horses think the way we do, but horses can certainly feel the way we do. There's a fellow called Jack Panksepp, and he's done a lot of research on mammal emotion. And what he's found is that mammals have the same brain structures as we do to process emotion. So it's likely that they feel the same emotions that we do. And so I think what I love about this picture is I think Reckless loves Tommy just as much as Tommy loves Reckless. And I think that's really important when we think about animal welfare, because it's not just how the horse thinks, but I think a really big part of their welfare is how they feel. And they definitely can, I believe, and the research suggests, feel in similar ways to the way we feel. So I just also wanted to sort of start off with just this slide about ideas that challenge us, help us grow. So if we always think the same as we've ever thought, then it's really hard to grow. So there might be some ideas that I'll present tonight that might challenge some of your ideas. And that's great, because I don't expect you to take them holus bolus, but it would be great if you could think about them and mull them over, and maybe do a bit of your own research and make your own decisions about, you know, where you think they fit with your practice. But if we never get presented with new ideas, then it's really hard to grow. So I'm bringing you these new ideas to sort of help you grow and help you progress with your skills with your horse. So one of the things that's really important when it comes to horse welfare, and we get a little bit protected from it here in Australia, but poor horse welfare or ridden horse welfare is a threat to the horse industry, and particularly over in Europe. There's a lot going on in the lead up to the Paris Olympics, because obviously there were a few problems at the Tokyo Olympics with the equestrian in terms of horse welfare. And I think over in Europe, they really don't want that to sort of happen again in Paris. And recently, a lady called Julie Taylor wrote this book, I Can't Watch Anymore. And she's written a book about the case for dropping equestrian from the Olympic Games. And primarily what she's saying is poor horse welfare means that we perhaps shouldn't have the equestrian in the Olympic Games. Now, it's not that Julie hates equestrian sport, but she's really worried about horse welfare. And poor ridden horse welfare is real. It's not just extremists who hate horses that want to get rid of equestrian sport. There is a bit of a problem. And if you look over to the right of the screen, there's a lovely woman called Jo Hockenhall, and she did some research back in about 2013, and she surveyed over 1,200 equestrian riders, you know, just sort of general recreational riders and sport horse riders, and she found that 91% of horses are performing some kind of problem behaviour in the previous 7 days. And I did some research last year and I surveyed Australian riders, and I found that 59% of horses performed one or more hyperreactive behaviour in the last 7 days. Now, hyperreactive behaviour I defined as bucking, rearing, spooking or bolting. So that's fairly extreme kind of behaviours, and 60% of horses that participants reported on in my study told me that their horse had done one of these behaviours in the last 7 days. So that's a bit of a red flag. It tells us that things are not going so well for horses all the time. So let's move on to the other side of the issue, which is poor human welfare. That's also a threat to the horse industry. So, and it's one of the reasons that prompted me to get involved in research and looking at horse welfare and rider safety, is because, like, I've been injured, my children have been injured, some of my friends have been quite seriously injured, and we hear all the time about riders getting injured. And I was just really curious about the relationship between horse welfare and rider safety, because I sort of, when I started my research, had a bit of an inkling that maybe if maybe those two things were related. And what I actually found was that there is a relationship between horse welfare and rider safety. So this was published earlier in the year. I'm happy to give people a copy if they'd like to read it. But what it showed was that there is a relationship. So you can see the squiggly lines there. It's not a direct one-to-one relationship, but there is a connection. So what the research showed was that if we could make horse welfare a little bit better, we actually also made our own safety better. And then the other element of my research was also looked at rider satisfaction. And what I've got here is, I think most of us will remember the really unfortunate situation where this German pentathlete at the Tokyo Olympics was in the gold medal position, and then she was riding Saint Boy, and it all just went terribly, terribly wrong for both of them in the show jumping. And for whatever reason, Saint Boy, he just wouldn't jump on that day. So, you know, you don't just pull a horse out of the paddock and send it to the Olympics. So clearly Saint Boy was capable of doing those jumps, but for whatever reason, there was something going on with him on that day, and his welfare was poor, and for whatever reason he wouldn't, or couldn't, most likely couldn't jump. And you can see the expression on that girl's face, like she is not having a good time, and I think we all remember her being really devastated in that show jumping. And then if you compare it to the other rider on the right, on the grey horse, where that horse has a face which tells me that it's having quite good welfare at that time. And if you look at her face, she looks like she's having fun too. And that's what the research bears out. So what I found with my study was that not only was performance better, but riders are having more fun. So if we're improving horse welfare, not only are we doing things to protect the longevity of the horse industry so that, you know, our children and grandchildren can enjoy horse sport the same way that we do, but it's also making it safer and more fun, and your horse can perform better. So there's some really good reasons to really care about welfare and incentives to make it better for you, for your horse. And as members of Pony Club, you're really fortunate because Pony Club Australia has been really proactive in looking at horse welfare and ways to protect horse welfare and improve it. And they've developed their new horse welfare policy, which I'm not actually going to talk about tonight, but I'm going to talk about what's underpinning that policy. And that is the 5 domains model. So without any further ado, so the 5 domains model covers, funnily enough, 5 domains. So 3 things that I know from my Pony Club days and from when I went through the coaching, people at Pony Club are pretty good with things like nutrition, environment, and physical health. So we all know about those aspects mostly in terms of how to care for and make sure our horse has good welfare. The 4th one is a little different. That's interaction. So that is talking about interaction between horses, so horse-to-horse interaction, and also interaction between horses and humans. And I've got the little call out there on training and riding. So those interactions that we have all then feed into this 5th domain, which is, I've called it mental health. Some people might call it mental status. And what happens is, so all of those elements in terms of nutrition, environment, physical health, and interactions, they all feed into this 5th domain, which is mental health. And it's a bit like our own mental health. It's dynamic, it's going to change. It won't be the same every day. But that's how you can think about your horse's welfare. And what we can do as riders is make decisions about how we can make our horse's mental health better. And when we do that, of course, we're then making their welfare better. So if we think about, well, what is good horse welfare? What is good horse welfare in terms of the 5 domains? So, you know, it's lots of things that are, some of them are similar to us, some of them are very different. But if you think about it, it's, you know, being free from pain, free from fear. Horses are social animals, so they like having friends around. How does your horse feel? Does he feel optimistic or is he pessimistic? So if a horse is optimistic, you would say he had good welfare. If he's pessimistic, he is likely to have poorer welfare. And you might be curious, well, how do you know if a horse is feeling optimistic or not? There are actually some really cool studies which scientists have put together where you can determine whether your horse is optimistic. And if we have enough time, and you're interested, I can talk you through those. The other thing is horses are designed to move. So, you know, if your horse has got freedom of movement, then that's going to enhance their welfare rather than being perhaps confined in a stable. Does your horse have choices? Can your horse make some choices in their life? So if we think about that in terms of how we feel, you know, think about lockdown when, you know, some of our choices were taken away. We couldn't choose, you know, to go and visit people when we wanted to and things like that. And that definitely had a negative effect for many people. And it's a bit like that for your horse. You know, does your horse get to choose? Are there different things that he or she can eat? Can he choose to go and stand under a tree in the shade or out in the sun? Things like that. And, you know, in terms of like the 5 domains model, we would call that agency. So does the horse have that ability to make some choices? Things like forage, you know, providing forage for your horse is, you know, partly it's about nutrition, but it's also about, you know, it feels good to chew, like horses like to chew. So, you know, having something different, for example, to chew can enhance your horse's welfare because it's pleasurable. You know, it's a bit like, you know, me on a Friday night. I love sitting on the couch eating some chips. I don't need the nutrition, but I kind of enjoy just, you know, eating chips. You know, it's a bit like that for your horses. And you can think about ways that you can enhance your horse's welfare by, you know, giving them different things. And the last one I've got there is stability. So, you know, we all function better when we, you know, you don't want things so stable that they become really boring and nothing ever happens. But, you know, that you can kind of predict what's going on. And it's the same for your horse, you know, that they sort of have a pretty good idea about what's going on in their life and what's going to happen next and those kinds of things. So in terms of what are the things we can do to improve our horse's welfare, and if we think about that 4th domain of interactions, you know, we feel pretty comfortable with all those other aspects. But if we think about the interaction aspect of the domain of interaction, you know, learning to accurately decode what your horse is telling you and responding in a way that enhances your horse's mental health. That's a really powerful tool that you have at your disposal to not only enhance your horse's welfare, but also, as we've talked about, improve your own safety. So whether you recognize it or not, your horse is always communicating with you and you're always communicating with your horse. So it's a bit like when your child arrives home from school and they're all grumpy. They don't have to actually say too much, but you know what kind of a day they've had. Well, it's a little bit the same with your horse. And you go down to the paddock or the stable and you see that your horse is grumpy, or they see that you're grumpy. You can get a gauge of how your horse is feeling. So one of the tools, or the first tool that I'd like to sort of share with you, is assessing horse welfare using horse facial expressions. So these are based on things called Grimace scales, and Grimace scales were developed for assessing pain in neonates, like so little babies, and also sometimes in dementia, and also in animals in terms of experimentation. So animals that are used for experimentation. So there is actually a Grimace scale for horses. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing tonight with you, but I'm just going to give you a few tips that you can use to see to make a bit of a guess about how things are going for your horse while they're being ridden. And these are 2 horses that are both being ridden. You can see the brown horse is probably not having quite as good a time as the grey horse. And you can, we look at the clues, how can we tell that this brown horse isn't doing so well? You can look at the ear position. So the ear position is back. The eye, is a really good window into how horses are feeling. So you can see the grey horse on the right, his eye is a lovely round shape, whereas the horse, the dark horse, his eye is more triangular. So you can see it's almost like he's frowning. So he's got tightening above his eye, and it means that the shape of the eye is more triangular than round. And then if you look at the horse's nostril, you can see the grey horse's nostril is quite oval in shape, And that's a bit of a clue that that horse is feeling quite relaxed and in a good state. Whereas the horse on the left, the horse's nostril is almost kind of squared off a bit. And of course you can see that the horse has its mouth open, and you can see the horse's tongue. It almost looks a little bit like the tongue might be a bit blue if you look at the colour of that horse's tongue compared to the inside of the nostril. So that blueness comes about if there's a lot of excessive pressure from the bit that cuts off the blood supply to the tongue. So these are just clues that you can use to make a judgment of how things are going with your horse. And then, of course, you get to work out what you might do next. So if we have another look, this is some racehorses, which I think are really interesting. So the racehorse on the left was actually part of a trial in Germany to demonstrate that racehorses could be ridden bitless. And if you have a look at this horse on the bitless horse on the left compared to the other horse on the right, again, it's that same pattern of clues about how the horse is feeling about what's going on at the moment. And you can see the bitless horse, he's got his ears pricked forward, his eye is that lovely oval shape. And even though that horse is, I don't know if he's galloping or he'll be galloping or cantering, maybe cantering, you can see that the horse's nostrils still have that, even though they've slightly expanded, they still have that oval shape. Whereas if you look at the horse on the right, the nostril is a really different shape and it certainly doesn't have that oval shape. And you can see the tension here above the horse's eye, and he's got his ears back. And again, like this horse has a tongue tie on. And again, you can see the colour of his tongue looks quite blue if you compare it to the colour of the nostril. But I think the other thing that's really interesting, and this has nothing, like this wasn't part of my research, but if you think about the fact that my research showed that there was a connection between the welfare of the horse and the welfare of the rider and how much fun the rider was having. If you look at the face of the jockey here on this horse, he looks like he's having more fun than this fellow. And it's just interesting. It's just an observation. There's no, it's just an observation. But it's really interesting how when you start to actually look at photographs that you see, when horses' faces look like the horse is having a good time, how often the face of the rider looks like they're having a good time as well. So as a coach and a pony club mum, I often would hear the phrase, about the naughty horse. And so the second tool that I wanted to talk to you about tonight was looking at horse behaviour and then making that connection back to horse welfare. Because really and truly, horses don't have the cognitive capacity to be naughty. It's a really complex process to be naughty, and horses don't really have the brain structures to be naughty in the way that it is truly meant. And I'll just run through a few quick examples. We've got like the naughty horse who won't go. So if you look at this horse here, and interesting, if you think about the face of the horse, we just looked at the different facial expressions of how well the horse is going. So you can see this horse is being tugged along with a lead rope, and he's saying, no, I don't want to go. Even though there's really no pressure on the horse's mouth, he still has his mouth open, which is kind of interesting, but he doesn't really look like he's that happy. And this horse, like the reason this horse won't go, it could be any number of things. He could be sore. He might have a friend that he doesn't want to leave. Where he's being led to might be scary. We don't really know. It's just a photograph. But it's not a sign that the horse is being naughty. It's a sign that there's something going wrong for the horse at this particular moment. Now, it doesn't mean to say we can't fix it really easily, but if we don't actually pay attention and we just sort of dismiss the behaviour as naughty, then we're unlikely to respond in a way that makes things better for the horse. if that makes sense. And then we have the classic, you know, the naughty horse who won't load. So again, this is probably, you know, a familiar sight at some point. I think we've all had a horse that wouldn't get on the float or wouldn't get on the truck, but it's not that the horse is naughty. It's there will be a reason why the horse doesn't want to get on the truck. And, you know, there's lots of people around this particular horse. He could be, you know, scared. Maybe he's never been on a truck before. So horses, being a prey animal, that, you know, their primary defense is to run away from things. If they get threatened, then getting into a dark cave doesn't really fit very well with, you know, with how their idea of safety works. So if we want our horses to float really well, then we have to train them that it is safe and it is okay to get in the float and that they will be okay. But the horse isn't being naughty. He's basically telling us that float's really scary and I don't want to go in there. And then we have the naughty horse who does things like bucking, rearing, bolting, or spooking. And I've got a bit of a disclaimer on the spooking bit. I've got a bit of an asterisk on there because spooking is perhaps a little bit different to the bucking, rearing, and bolting. And basically, most people who work in horse research would agree that if you've got a horse who is bucking, rearing, bolting, or spooking, then that's a pretty clear sign that things aren't going so well for the horse. It's not that the horse is being naughty or the horse is trying to get out of work, or it's basically a really extreme reaction. If a horse could shout or scream, it's a bit like that. And so that's a really strong sign that, you know, this horse is having poor welfare at this particular time. And it's really dangerous to encourage people to ride through that behavior, which I've been instructed to, just ride through it. And whilst you can, you know, sometimes you can ride through the behavior and you might survive and not get hurt, and your horse might not get hurt. And it might seem like it's a bit of a victory. But if you think about it a bit more, you know, unpack it a little bit more, you know, if the horse is really shouting at you, things are really going bad for me, and your response as the rider or the owner is to basically say, well, just suck it up and get on with it, and, you know, either use your whip or your spur or whatever it might be, or your legs, and essentially just shut down the behavior. It doesn't do much for that horse-human relationship. And I think that one of the reasons we all choose to ride horses is because we love them, and we love that sense of partnership and, you know, that you don't get from a motorbike or, you know, some other sport or a tennis racket. You know, the reason we love horses is because we love that bond. And, you know, if you sort of shut down and respond in a way that's kind of harsh and tells the horse, well, I'm the boss and I want to win, then you might win that battle, but you probably haven't done much for your relationship with your horse. And that's apart from the fact that, you know, it's dangerous, the horse can get hurt, you can get hurt. So it's much safer and much better, I believe, to de-escalate, you know, and that can be dismounting. You know, if you've got a horse that's perhaps a bit green or, you know, is in an unfamiliar environment, you know, try it somewhere else. Try it where it is more familiar, where the horse feels safer. Maybe it could, you know, you can make the horse feel better by butting them up with another horse. Or sometimes horses can react badly if it's, you know, you're asking them to do something really hard, you know, that they can't do or they don't understand. So you can pick an easier task. And the thing is, when you make these changes, it's not that you're going to have to do this forever. You know, it may be that you just have to do it for a little while until the horse gets used to whatever it is that you're asking them to do, you know, gets a bit more experience, gets a bit more confident. You know, if the behaviour is due to pain or something, you might get the horse assessed by the vet, get whatever it is resolved. Maybe it's a badly fitting saddle, and then all of a sudden you're on your way and you don't have to, you don't have to deal with that behavior anymore. But you've done it in a way where you haven't undermined your partnership with your horse. And sometimes I've heard, people say, oh, if I don't ride through this behavior, then the horse is going to win. Well, I don't think horses really keep score about winning and losing. And if you think about the psychology of horses, like horses are herd animals. They stick together. So they're much more focused on getting along and, partnering up and buddying up with people than winning and losing. Like, I think the winning and losing thing is much more of a human thing than a horse thing. And just to give you a bit of some evidence from the science about this as well, going back to Jo Hockenhall, she surveyed over 1,200 riders, and what she found with those 1,200 riders, that the riders who used more rewards, so if they irrespective of what the horse did, just the riders that used more rewards, so even if the horse didn't do something really what the rider wanted, but the rider still responded in a positive way and rewarded the horse, these riders, as you might not expect, actually had fewer behavior problems. So you might think, oh, well, they're rewarding bad behavior, so you would expect them to have worse behaved horses. But in actual fact, she found the opposite. She found the riders who dished out the most rewards to their horses had the fewest behavior problems. So, if you're worried that if you let your horse win, that you're going to create problems in the future, the research would actually suggest the opposite. The research would suggest that you'll actually have fewer. And although Jo didn't go into it in her research, one explanation for why that might be is because those riders and horses had better relationships. So even though the horse, didn't do the right thing, but the rider was still kind and rewarded the horse, they had a better partnership. So that's one explanation. There's no definitive science that I've seen to explain that, but that is one explanation. Okay, so horse welfare warning sign number 1. So I've got a picture here of a little detective, because I sort of feel like most of the time when I'm working with my horses, I feel like I'm a bit of a detective. So if you've got a horse who stops doing something they have been doing, like they've been doing well, or they resist learning something, they're not being naughty. They're telling you something is wrong. Okay. And what that something could be, it could be the horse is confused. They don't understand. So particularly when you're training something new, they might not actually really understand what it is you're asking. Maybe you're using conflicting aids. So as a pony club mum, for example, my littlest daughter really, really wanted to, jump bigger jumps as she grew up. But she was also really, really scared. So she would often, have the handbrake on at the front with the rein aids, but the legs going at the same time. So the poor old pony is like, well, what do I do? Do I go or do I stop? Because clearly no one can go and stop at the same time. So, you have to be really sure that you're not actually using conflicting aids, because that's not fair to the horse. Maybe your aids aren't clear. That could be a reason why they stop doing something they've been doing well. Maybe there's pain involved. Maybe the horse just isn't able to do it. This is something particularly for, ambitious riders who want to go up the grades. Like, not every horse is a super duper high level athlete, and maybe there are things that they can't do. And so rather than thinking that they're being naughty, it might just be that they've reached their limit, Maybe there's, it's a scary location, or maybe there's no friends around. Maybe it's stressed. Maybe he's just having a bad day, or she. And I think one important one for children, particularly when they're having lessons. That's what I found with my children, when they'd go off and they'd be really enthusiastic, and they had these great coaches who would coach them, and they'd have a terrific lesson. And then the next day they'd go take their horse down to the arena and they'd try and, replicate what they did in the lesson. And the horse just wasn't performing as well. And I think sometimes what was happening was that the horse was just a bit sore. They'd had a big day the day before, and it just, the horse just wasn't able to perform quite the same, a bit like us, where we've had a big day at the gym, and then, the next day it's sore and we can't perform. So these are just things, and they're just things to think about, rather than just the default, oh, he's being naughty, he's not doing what I want, he's trying to wreck my day. It's more think of it, because it won't be that, it'll be something else. And then it's your job as the rider or the horse owner is to be that detective and think, well, what can it be, and how can I fix it? And just to give you a little bit of insight into this as well, this is a study that was done in endurance horses, and this is a picture of a pretty happy endurance horse and rider, I think. And so they had 38 endurance horses in this study. And what they did was they looked at, they had 11 horses that were performing well, and they had 27 that were performing poorly. And essentially what they found was that every horse that was performing well was disease-free. They had no disease, whereas all of the poor performing horses had something wrong. So the something wrong could be respiratory disease, musculoskeletal problems like lameness, or cardiac problems. And what the thing with this was that these problems were subclinical. So if you look at the title of this paper, so there were subclinical diseases that were underlying the poor performance. So what that means is it was really nobody's fault, because subclinical means you can't see it. You can only find it when you actually take the horse to the vet and you do some, get the vet, it does some investigations, and then you can find it. So it wasn't like these horses were trotting around on 3 legs, or, had a really obvious respiratory problem, so you could hear the horse, struggling to breathe or anything. But what they did find was, when they did the investigations, that there were these underlying diseases. So I guess the bottom line is, or the take-home message is, that horses don't really fake. So if you've got a horse that's been performing well and it's starting to underperform, be really suspicious about what could be causing that horse to underperform. This is just one study. There are others as well that have had similar findings. So it's underperformance is very, very often related to some kind of physical problem. So horses don't really fake. So, and if we think about our horse welfare in the 5 domains, that you then have that information, and you can then make decisions with your interactions and how you treat that horse that's underperforming, to decide what sort of welfare that horse is going to have going into the future. So horse welfare warning sign number 2, aggression and dangerous behaviour is almost always pain. There's been quite a few studies looking at aggression in particular, and found that most horses, if they're looking at you like this, this horse here, it's generally related to pain. So be really suspicious. If you've got a horse that's, really snitchy while you're tacking up, or tries to bite or kick, be really suspicious, because it probably is pain. And I just want to share with you here a study, and this was looking at horses that there were 14 horses in this study, and they were behaving so dangerously that their owners and the vets decided that the best thing for the horses and the owners was to put them down, which is really sad. And then after the horses were put down, the horses were examined by the vets, and what they found was that in every single one of these horses, there was evidence to suggest that they had really intractable pain. and it was neuropathic pain, most likely. And it was in their axial skeleton. So it was sort of in the part of the skeleton from the head down to the tail, not really including the legs. So there's somewhere along the horse's top line, there was some kind of pathology that the investigators found, which suggested that they had this intractable neuropathic pain. And the thing with neuropathic pain is it can be random. So it's not necessarily related to any particular thing that the horse might be doing or might have done. And it can just randomly strike the horse, and it tends to feel like stabbing, shooting or burning in people. So, and what these horses, if you look at the ages of these horses, you've got some of them that are as old as 12 and 14. And some of them, I think these 3 horses that I've got highlighted in red, had been owned by the owners since they were foals, and these owners had persisted with this dangerous behaviour right up until, in one case, the horse was 8. And if you think about how the horse's welfare during this time, it's a little bit sad, because these horses would have had quite a lot of pain, and the owner's trying to do the right thing, and they do training thinking it's a training issue, when in fact the behaviour was related to pain. So again, it's just evidence to suggest that if you've got a horse that is behaving in an aggressive or a dangerous kind of way, be really suspicious that it might be pain. And then just the last thing, so we've talked about the different types of behaviour and the facial expressions of horses to give you a bit of insight into what might be going on for the horse in terms of how they're perceiving their life, and whether they've got good mental health or poor mental health, or well-being or welfare, whichever word we prefer to use. This is a study that was done in France in 2012, and what these researchers did is they looked at horses' posture, and basically the horses in the top row of photographs came from one riding school, and the horses that came the horses in the bottom row came from a different riding school. And if you look at their postures, what you notice is that if you look at the top line between sort of the wither and the horse's ears and the shape of the horse's neck, mostly the horses in the top row, their necks resemble a little bit like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Whereas if you look at the horses down the bottom row, you can see in front of the wither is quite pronounced dip, particularly in the first 2 on the left, not so much in the chestnut horse down the bottom, but there's a dip in front of the withers, and you can see that the neck kind of looks hollow along the top line. Particularly the black or brown horse in the middle and the bottom row. So you've got the horses up the top where you've got the Sydney Harbour Bridge sort of look of the neck, and then the ones down the bottom where it looks a bit hollow and there's that dip between the withers. Now, what these researchers found was that the horses down the bottom had more back pain than the horses at the top. So if the horse with the posture down the bottom, in the bottom row, they were more likely to have back pain and more severe back pain than the horses in the top row. And the other thing that they found was that these horses in the bottom row were more likely to be aggressive as well. So linked in with the back pain was aggression. And the biggest difference that they found to explain why these horses had these different postures was the way that they were ridden. So in the coaches at the riding school for the top horses, they encouraged riders to keep their hands low and to have their hands forward and have a very soft to no contact, remembering these are beginner riders. So these are beginners riding, learning to ride. So the horses up the top, they were encouraged by the coaches to have low hands and push their hands forward, whereas the coaches in riding school B, where the horses had the poorer posture, those coaches emphasised that the riders have shorter and tighter reins and held their hands slightly higher. So that was the biggest difference between those two riding schools. And the different style of riding and coaching related to these different postures and the incidence of back pain in horses. So all of these things are just tools that you can use at home. It's not in any way to suggest that this replaces a veterinary diagnosis, but it is, they're clues that you can use to help you decode what might be going on if you start to encounter problems with your horse. So, you know, it's not to suggest that you don't need to take your horse to the vet if you think that there's problems, but it might just give you a clue so that you can respond in a way that makes your horse's welfare better. So if we think about our 5 domains model, we've got the nutrition, environment, physical health, and interaction. So if you think about all of those things, there are lots of things that you can tinker with to help improve your horse's mental health or welfare or well-being. And so I've talked a little bit about some behavioural signs and the facial signs tonight, which I hope you'll find useful. And I certainly encourage you to go out and have a look at your horses and have a play around and see what you can work out in terms of, you know, how you respond and how different things make your horse feel and those sorts of things. But they all, you can see that there's lots of opportunities to improve our horse's welfare. And yes, I've focused on the riding and training bit tonight, but there's lots of other things as well. And as I covered earlier, you know, if we make the horse's welfare better, then it's safer for us as riders, but also our horses will perform better for us, and they are just much more fun to ride. And that's definitely borne out in the research. So we might need to make some changes in how we do things. I'm sure a few of you have picked up on the Bitless Horses. Now, you know, that's not to suggest that all horses should be ridden bitless by any stretch. I've just chosen those pictures as more to get people thinking, and it's just one thing, you know, as we've talked about, there are lots of different things in terms of how we can make horse welfare better. That is just one option. I certainly have horses here that I ride in bits, and I have some that I ride bitless. It's about finding what works for any particular horse. But we do need to think about changing things up and doing things a little different. And, you know, with any change, it takes a bit of courage. It also takes a bit of resilience because you don't always get it right. I don't always get it right. I make mistakes all the time with my horses. But, you know, you have good intentions and you make the mistake. You go, oh, that didn't work out quite out how I thought it was going to. And then you just move on and try something else. And the other thing that I think we really need to embrace is partnership. And that means, you know, partnering up with Pony Club, partnering up with your horse, partnering up with each other, with our coaches, because it's when we all help each other out and we see, I think when we see the relationship as a partnership, that's where we can really make some great changes to not only improve horse welfare, but also protect the sport that we love. So my suggestion is go easy, laugh a lot, have some fun, and be brave and try some different things. And when you start to tune in and listen to your horse, you definitely can have a lot of fun along the way while you're also improving their welfare. So this is a picture of me. I just thought I'd show that I can ride a horse. This is doing what I love. So my passion is eventing and being on cross country. And I had lots of fun riding this fellow around cross country, but sadly I haven't been able to do that much recently. I do have a little business. You're welcome to get in touch with me if anything that I've said tonight you think is helpful or I can help with, or if you'd like copies of any papers that I've mentioned, if you'd like to read the whole paper, I'm more than happy to provide those to people. So thank you very much, and I look forward to answering some questions.
Thanks, Karen. And I meant to mention at the beginning that Karen also is a member of the Pony Club Australia Education and Development Committee. So that's a committee with people who are highly skilled in relevant areas for us, and certainly in the focus that we have on rider and coach education. So moving on to questions. If you want to ask a question, I'll unmute you if you want to put your hand up, but I'll go through the ones that we have here that people have already written. A horse will buck in the paddock as a sign of joy. So how do you decide whether it's a joyous buck or a bad behaviour?
I think bucking in the paddock, you're right, it can be joyous behaviour, and I think it's a bit different. I'm talking about bucking under saddle, yeah, rather than bucking in the paddock. I think what they do in the paddock is up to them.
Isn't forage essential for gut health, not just for pleasure? Well, I think, yes, that's absolutely true.
Yes,
so,
yeah, 100% true. Yeah.
This is the one that we've had a debate about on social media.
Yeah.
On de-escalating. Mm-hmm. So this is the question: isn't getting off when a horse bucks just rewarding bad behaviour?
Well, I don't think it's rewarding bad behaviour. If a horse is bucking and you get off, I think the biggest issue is safety. So, you know, if someone stays on a horse that's bucking, and that person then goes on to get really badly injured, then that's a terrible outcome. That's one level to look at it. The other thing is there will be an emotional element to bucking as well. So there's the behavioural element that you've mentioned, and the horse may or may not make the connection. It depends how quickly you get off. Like, horses have a really short attention span. I think unless it's within a few seconds, the horse actually won't associate the bucking and the getting off. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is the emotional component. So if a horse is bucking, there's something really going wrong for that horse at that time. Now, that could be the horse feels overwhelmed. It could be really stressed. There could be pain involved. So if you think about it, the reason that I showed everybody the picture of Tommy and Reckless was to sort of highlight that there's an emotional connection between people and horses. It's why we do what we do, because we love them and we love that partnership with them. If a horse is bucking, there's an emotional component to that, and you can't reward emotion. You can reward behavior, but you can't reward emotion. They're just two different circuits, and they don't work in the same way. So if you ignore that emotional cry for help, if you like, with the bucking, then you're going to undermine the relationship you have with your horse. So you've got the safety aspect, but then you've got that partnership aspect. And then, like I mentioned with Jo Hockenhall's work, what she found was that even if you're rewarding, if we want to call it rewarding, even if we're rewarding that bad behavior, her research showed that those horses still had fewer behavioral problems than when people sort of reacted in a more sort of punitive or, a more assertive sort of a way. So the riders who, let's say you choose, if you've got a horse bucking, you decide to ride through it and you're going to use lots of strong leg aids and reef the horse's head up with the reins and ride through it. She found that riders who chose that as their option to respond rather than de-escalate and reward, if we want to call it that, those riders that chose the second option had fewer problems. So I think if you're concerned that the horse is going to learn to be rewarded from bucking, I don't think that will be the case. And that's what the research would suggest.
Okay, the next one. So the images that you had of the two different conformations of the horses from the riding schools.
Yeah.
Are the second horses with the weaker necklines and conformation, is that able to be fixed?
Yeah, it's like I don't know on those particular horses. Like what they found with those horses was that that it was the riding, so it was the style, the way the horses were ridden that had caused the conformation change. So I can talk from I have a case study. I have a horse with a sore back, and she had that lovely Sydney Harbour Bridge shaped neck. I rode her in a particular way that I was being coached to ride at the time, and this is before I realised she had a sore back, and her neck definitely hollowed out. When I stopped riding her, let her have some paddock rest for a few months, and then reintroduced her to riding in a way that she could cope with, her neckline did recover. So that's a trial of one. So I think the answer to that question will be, it depends. It will be depends on if you can fix the underlying problem, which in those horses was back problem. So if you can address the back problem so that the horse is comfortable, and then ride them in a way that the horse is comfortable, then yes, you can recover the neckline. Yep.
And we have a question from Wendy, and we're going to you should be able to unmute yourself, Wendy, and ask your question.
Unmute. Am I unmuted now?
There you go.
Thank you. I can't seem to write in the chat column.
That's okay.
Something of a personal nature that has cropped up for us, and it really fits, I think, here, is when you buy a horse and you have a vet check,
Mm-hmm.
and everything seems fine, and then you proceed on, you do your weekly lessons, and by chance you discover that, well, by chance your coach says your horse is short stepping, your horse is lame. Now, there's no behaviours of any note that, no, everything is really fine, lovely horse. And then we proceed on. Well, we give him a week off, and then we keep going. And then the same coach says, Wendy, he's really lame. Get him looked at. Can't you see that short stepping? I said, oh, yeah, I can see it now. It's not the sort of lameness I'm aware of, really, short stepping. I mean, you have to really look. Anyway, he turns out to be a horse with one kissing spine, and with the history. Now we have the history. We managed to finally get the history from the previous owner. She had to sign on the written release form from the vet, who was very reluctant to release the information. And then we seemed to be reluctant because he said to her very strongly, don't do this. They're already asking lots of questions, and you could be, you could open yourself up for legal ramifications. But so what I'm really asking is, here is a horse we had for 14 months. We didn't realize he had a kissing spine. He didn't seem to be, well, not noticeably sore, because we weren't palpating him as such, but we were brushing him and looking after him, and he had lovely, saddle and lovely everything, lovely rider. But now, he's been sold. This is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is a horse welfare issue. He's been sold on as a vulnerable horse, and I believe the previous owner had him for 4 years. She was also sold on a vulnerable horse.
Mm-hmm.
I believe. We're still investigating. But, it's just, what do we do about people who are wheeling and dealing in horses, and they know? They lie to the vets. The vet said to this agent, this sales agent, how long have you known the horse? The agent said, 2 years. And has he shown signs of, there were 4 boxes, lameness, I don't know if you have, she said no. So she lies, this person lies to the vet.
Mm. Yeah.
And what are the ramifications of that, that she lies to the vet? When I say to the vet, what happens now? Or, he said, well, she lied. But, so someone like me, well, now we have this really vulnerable horse that we have to spend a lot of money on with therapy. So it doesn't quite fit what, your domains. But what I'm trying to say is that this horse was vulnerable and we didn't know it. The whole 14 months. And all we had was a short step. But I think if we'd ridden him very thoroughly, really heavily, do you know what I mean? If we were eventing, for instance, we went and raced him around for 3 days or something, he may have fallen in a heap, because that's the history, actually, that he had fallen in a heap.
Yeah.
So it's just difficult, isn't it? What do you do about people like that who are doing this stuff, you know? So
yeah.
It is really tricky, and I guess all you can do is, you know, have integrity in your own dealings. You can't you can't do anything about what other people are choosing to do or not do.
And you know, when we talked to the vet who'd done the vet check, I didn't talk to him because I criticised him, because he actually did as good a job as he could have done. He said, that's why people aren't bothering with vet checks these days. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, because we only pick up so much. We can't pick up a kissing spine or because he didn't palpate to pain, you know, he didn't have pain. And he didn't show signs of lameness. So I said maybe he was on bute, or maybe he'd been rested. He said any of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and all you can really do is probably X-ray before you purchase.
Yes.
And
well, you'll do that
when
you buy a $100,000 horse, I suppose. You'll do that. You'll X-ray everything.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Now we have one which is, does PCA have a position regarding horse welfare in terms of the time and the level of work required by horses at events? Recently had a long event where riders had a series of activities, being in the saddle for long hours and tired horses and riders. So I think this is also an issue with pony club camps too, that when people do have an event on that requires a horse with a certain level of fitness, we can see that some clubs are, you know, they let people have notice and preparing your horse for camp and those sorts of things, which includes a fitness program. In terms of, do we have a rule on what people can do? There is a rule about the number of jumping activities in a day, but without knowing the details, then there aren't vet and fitness checks for horses before they do events. So it's up to, I think, officials and riders to monitor their horses for tiredness, and for those horses to be taken out. And I think our welfare policy certainly enables officials to do that now. Karen, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would just really encourage you to, you know, use some of the things that I've talked about today. You know, there's probably other things that you can look at as well, but just monitor your own horse and you know, be the advocate for your horse. So if you feel like it is too much, well, then I guess, you know, I hope this is okay, Catherine, but I would be saying, you know, put a stop to it and say, well, you know, we need to retire because the horses had enough. So, you know, because obviously people are really busy. Like, you know, when I was a kid, we rode every day for a long time, but, you know, parents are really busy these days, kids are really busy these days. So I think it is hard to get horses really fit, so, you know, perhaps how we might have done in the past. So you know, it is really hard, and I guess we just have to recognise that, and then maybe monitor and sort of adjust how much work we expect the horse to do on any given day.
We have a question from Sarah, so you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh, thank you. The chats aren't working on mine as well.
Okay.
I just wanted to, just following up from that point, thank you, Pony Club, for the increased welfare commentary that's been coming through on the social media. It's been really significant improvement. And just to reassure, just to follow on what Karen said about being the advocate for your own horse, we're in a forum where there's a lot of parents with a lot of knowledge in this, and their perspective of what horse welfare is very different. And I don't think it is sufficient just for us to be advocates of, like, it is required, but I don't think it's sufficient for us to just be advocates for our own horses. And I would really like to use this opportunity to appeal to Pony Club to increase the education significantly even more, like bombard us with welfare standards, from the point of view of that, you know, if you asked your kid to play soccer for 6 hours and the kids are at Pony Club for 6 hours, they'd be falling over. And often the ponies are out once a month for 6 or 7 hours. They'd come on a float for up to 45 minutes to get there, which the welfare standards show that's the equivalent of them being ridden for 45 minutes, just being on the float. Then they stand tied up at the side of the float with a bit of hay and a little bit of water in the sun. I think that the Pony Club welfare needs to be much more vocal about what appropriate welfare is, and get the community far more fired up and engaged about this. And elements such as rider weight limits. I think this is the learning forum for kids. This is the place that they come for education. We need to, as a body, really have this at the forefront, like maybe even having welfare awards or something. Like, it's probably more than this evening's discussion, but I wanted to thank you and just to basically encourage you to have more opportunities like this and much more information out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I think I'll answer for the organisation. 2 points. We do have a Welfare Warrior Award. So if you've got somebody who, this is about highlighting people who are welfare champions and would love people to nominate more people for welfare awards. And secondly, I would encourage you to read the new horse welfare policy, which is at its essence is a disciplinary policy, and it sets those standards for things which are a breach of the policy and for things for which people should be reported. And also it has things that we encourage our coaches and officials to monitor and provide advice about. So that is, we will be doing more and more education about welfare. The policy itself is principally a disciplinary policy. And that's to draw a line in the sand on the things that are accepted or not. In the absence of other questions, I'm going to ask Karen one.
Okay.
This is all great, but what do we do about dressage judges that keep rewarding people that have their horse's head behind the vertical and all of those things and all of those equine pain faces and everything that we see in the highest levels of dressage, and these people keep winning?
It's a real problem, Catherine. I think it's a problem not just at Pony Club. I think it goes across lots of organisations. I guess all we can do is continue to educate people and encourage people to look at the faces, but also look at the rules. Like, you know, as far as I'm aware, horses are meant to have their nose in front of the vertical in dressage. Last time I read the FEI rules. So I wish I had a really great answer for you, Catherine, but I think all we can do is work together. Like, I really think there's just the strength in numbers. So working together, trying to bring the dressage judges into the fold and, you know, and help them see what the research shows and what you can see, and and encourage them. That's really all we can do, unless we start sort of, I guess, being more selective with our dressage judges, so that the judges that are rewarding correct sort of riding, if you like, and riding that does promote horse welfare, getting those judges to do more of the judging than the ones who are encouraging other types of riding. I guess that's all we really can do. I wish I had a better answer.
Philip would like to talk about the weight of riders and horses. I don't think this is a platform to talk about the PCA policy, so I'm not sure, Phil, if that's what you'd like to talk about. And it's not a place to debate the policy either. So did you want me to unmute you? Did you want to put your hand up? Or otherwise we'll... leave that one. Okay, then, in the absence of anything else, we'll call a close to this session. As I said, thank you very much for attending. This will be put up on our YouTube channel in a few days' time. And I think all that's left to do now is to thank Karen for her time and her expertise in presenting the session for us. So good evening, everyone.